The acrid stench of my burned house was still in my hair when she strutted into my courtroom like she owned the place. There I sat, Judge Miriam Blackwood, black robes, gavel in hand, staring at the woman who'd just committed arson against a sitting judge. The sheer balls of it made my teeth clench. But Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea what she'd just walked into. See, when you torch a judge's home, you better pray she doesn't get the chance to return the favor legally. And honey, I was about to serve up a 5-course meal of justice with a side of federal prison time. This HOA, Karen thought burning down my house would shut me up. Instead, it lit a fire under me that would consume her entire criminal empire. Every illegal fine, every fraudulent claim, every intimidation tactic, I had it all documented. What would you do if your destroyer just handed themselves to you on a silver legal platter? Where are you watching from? Because this revenge gets brutal. 6 months before my house became a crime scene, I was Judge Miriam Blackwood, respected, feared by criminals, and completely shattered. I'd just buried Harold after watching cancer devour him piece by piece. 28 years of marriage, gone. Our 1940s craftsman home in Pinewood Estates felt like a mausoleum. Pinewood used to be where blue-collar families raised kids and retired teachers tended flower gardens. Then the money moved in. Suddenly, modest ranch homes were getting torn down for McMansions with 3-car garages and wine cellars. The old-timers, people like Walt Henderson, who'd lived here since 1965, watched their property taxes skyrocket while new residents complained about maintaining neighborhood standards. Enter the queen bee of this gentrification army, Bryn Ashworth Sterling. Picture every entitled suburban nightmare you've ever encountered, then add designer athleisure and a god complex. 45 years old, driving a silver Tesla that cost more than most people's annual salary, always clutching some $20 superfood smoothie while explaining why everyone else was doing life wrong. She'd moved in 2 years ago with her contractor husband, immediately announcing plans to elevate Pinewood to its full potential. Translation: get rid of the undesirables. My first encounter with Bryn happened while I was installing Harold's memorial fence. We'd planned this 6-foot privacy barrier together during his final months, our sanctuary where we could drink coffee and watch sunrises without prying eyes. The sweet scent of his prize roses filled the morning air as I worked, 15 years of his careful tending still blooming despite his absence. The crunch of expensive boots on autumn leaves announced her arrival. You must be the widow. Not condolences, not introduction, just cold assessment. Judge Blackwood, I corrected, wiping soil from my hands with deliberate calm. Right, the judge. She pronounced my title like it was a disease. I'm Bryn, HOA president, we have a problem. Out came the pink tape measure, clearly her weapon of choice. The metallic snap of it extending cut through the morning quiet like a whip crack. She measured my fence with theatrical precision, lips pursed in manufactured disapproval. 6 feet 2 inches. Our regulations clearly state 6 feet maximum. That's a $500 violation plus immediate removal costs. I stood slowly, vertebrae popping from grief and sleepless nights. Show me that regulation. Her manicured fingers shuffled through a leather portfolio, clicking against papers like tiny gavels. 5 minutes of searching produced nothing because the regulation didn't exist. My fence measured exactly 6 feet. I'd hired a licensed surveyor specifically to avoid this nonsense. Well, she huffed, face reddening under her spray tan, we'll see about that, Judge. The venom in her voice revealed this wasn't about property standards. That evening, over microwaved leftovers and Harold's favorite bourbon, I pulled up court records. Bingo. 3 years ago, Sterling Premium Builders had appeared before my bench trying to scam an 80-year-old veteran out of $30,000 for emergency roof repairs. The roof was fine. I'd ruled against them hard, including referring them for contractor fraud investigation. This fence bullshit was revenge, pure and simple. But Bryn had made a critical error. She'd targeted a woman who'd spent 20 years sentencing murderers, rapists, and con artists without flinching. Someone who'd watched her soulmate die with dignity while planning how to honor his memory. A person with absolutely nothing left to lose and a complete understanding of how the legal system could be weaponized by someone who knew its every weakness. The rough texture of Harold's fence posts under my palm reminded me why I'd built this barrier. Not to keep the world out, but to protect something sacred. Our memories, our love, our final project together. Bryn Ashworth Sterling had just declared war on a federal judge's sanctuary. In my courtroom, we had a technical term for that level of stupidity. Exhibit A in a federal case. She had no idea what she'd just unleashed. Within 2 weeks, Bryn launched what I can only describe as psychological warfare disguised as HOA enforcement. The woman had clearly studied every petty tyrant's playbook and decided to turn my life into her personal stress test laboratory. The certified letters started arriving like clockwork, thick manila envelopes that made my mailman wince apologetically. 7 pieces of registered mail in 10 days, each more absurd than the last. Violation notice number 1, unapproved decorative garden feature. The offense? Harold's memorial stone, a simple granite marker reading, "In memory of love that grows eternal." Apparently, grief monuments violated Pinewood's uniform landscape aesthetic. Violation notice number 2, non-regulation mailbox color. My black mailbox had been standard issue since Reagan was president. Suddenly it was creating visual discord. But the one that made my teeth grind? Violation notice number 3, excessive bird feeding creating nuisance conditions. My single modest feeder attracted cardinals, Harold's favorite birds. Watching them had become my morning ritual, coffee steam mixing with mountain air while I pretended he might still walk up behind me. Each letter demanded fines between $200 and $500, threatening liens and legal action. The expensive paper stock probably cost more than most violations themselves. Here's where 20 years on the bench paid off. During law school, I'd memorized Colorado's HOA statutes after my landlord tried similar intimidation tactics. These letters contained more legal holes than a mob lawyer's alibi. Real HOA fines must be reasonable, related to actual violations, and properly documented in adopted bylaws. Bryn's notices cited non-existent regulations and failed to provide mandatory hearing procedures. Time for judicial payback. I spent 3 evenings in Harold's basement office, surrounded by his law books and the musty smell of old legal volumes, building my counterattack. Filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission detailing Bryn's procedural violations. Photographed my property from every angle. Created spreadsheets documenting her illegal fine patterns. My evidence preservation training was about to become weaponized. But Bryn wasn't finished with amateur hour. On Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing drunk drivers, my new security cameras captured pure criminal stupidity in action. Bryn arrived with an entourage, her interior designer, a skeletal woman in head-to-toe white, and her personal trainer, apparently moonlighting as a property inspector. They spent 2 hours manufacturing evidence for non-existent violations. The designer pointed dramatically at Harold's prize roses, like 15 years of careful cultivation had personally insulted her aesthetic sensibilities. The trainer, clearly more familiar with protein powder than property law, took notes on official-looking clipboards. I watched the footage that evening with mounting rage. These people were creating fraudulent documentation to support fraudulent fines. In my courtroom, we called this conspiracy to commit fraud. Then Walt Henderson knocked on my door, pipe tobacco mixing with cool evening air as he spoke in worried whispers. "Judge, this Bryn woman's been systematically targeting people. Remember the Rodriguez family? Forced them to remove their Virgin of Guadalupe garden statue, called it non-conforming religious imagery, $800 in fines before they finally sold and moved away." My judicial instincts kicked in. What else? Single mom down the street got fined for her kids' chalk art on their own driveway, said it was defacing common area aesthetics. We're talking about rainbows and hopscotch squares, Judge. The pattern crystallized like evidence falling into place during closing arguments. Bryn wasn't just targeting me, she was running a systematic harassment campaign against anyone who didn't fit her suburban master race fantasy. Hispanic families, single mothers, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and now a widowed judge who'd previously ruled against her husband's contractor scams. This was discrimination wrapped in HOA bureaucracy, backed by fraudulent documentation and illegal fine structures. I'd stumbled into the middle of a much larger criminal enterprise that made my fence dispute look like jaywalking. The scratching sound of my pen documenting these revelations filled Harold's quiet office. He'd always said good legal strategy was like surgery, precise, methodical, and devastatingly effective when executed properly. I was about to perform major surgery on Bryn Ashworth Sterling's little kingdom of petty tyranny. She'd made the classic mistake of targeting someone who understood exactly how to dismantle her operation piece by piece, using the same legal system she'd been bastardizing for her personal vendettas. Harold used to joke that judges were just referees with law degrees and permanent attitudes. Time to show this HOA, Karen, what happens when you pick a fight with someone who writes the rules of engagement for a living. Bryn's next move crossed the line from harassment into felony territory. The woman had apparently decided that if manufactured violations weren't working, actual breaking and entering might send a stronger message. She struck while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater to 18 months. My security cameras captured every criminal second of her emergency property inspection, a legal authority that existed only in her delusional imagination. There she was, bold as brass in designer yoga pants, strutting through my backyard like she'd bought the deed, pink tape measure in hand, photographing everything from angles that would embarrass a paparazzi stalker. The audacity peaked when she pressed her face against my kitchen window, shading her eyes to peer inside at Harold's coffee mug still sitting on the counter, the one I couldn't bring myself to wash. But Bryn's criminal stupidity reached new heights when she deliberately left my back gate wide open. Not accidentally, deliberately. The security footage showed her yanking it open, checking to make sure the latch wouldn't catch, then walking away with a satisfied smirk. When I arrived home that evening, bone-tired from listening to domestic violence testimony, I found my sanctuary violated, and my worst nightmare realized: Gavel was missing. This 14-year-old tabby wasn't just a pet. He was Harold's final gift to me, rescued from the courthouse parking lot during a thunderstorm 3 years ago. The cat who'd sat on Harold's lap during chemo treatments, purring comfort into his pain. My last living connection to 28 years of marriage. The panic hit like a physical blow. I spent 3 days searching, my voice hoarse from calling his name through every alley and storm drain in a 6-block radius. Walt Henderson organized neighborhood search parties. Even the Rodriguez family, who'd moved away because of Bryn's harassment, drove back to help look. Then came the phone call that made my blood freeze. Judge Blackwood? This is Dr. Martinez at Mountain View Animal Emergency. Someone brought in a cat matching your description. He's in pretty bad shape. I found Gavel barely conscious in an oxygen tent, his ribs broken, severely dehydrated and traumatized beyond recognition. $800 in emergency surgery later, the vet delivered news that made my hands shake with rage. These injuries are consistent with being chased by machinery. High-powered leaf blowers, maybe lawn equipment. The stress alone nearly killed him. The security footage revealed the truth. 1 hour after Bryn's illegal trespassing, her landscaping crew had arrived with industrial leaf blowers, terrorizing my traumatized cat through the open gate she'd left as an escape route. They'd chased him 2 blocks before he'd fallen into a storm drain, broken and dying. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder of my family. But here's where Bryn made her fatal mistake. She'd just committed multiple felonies against a sitting judge who understood exactly how to weaponize the legal system for maximum destruction. I changed every lock, posted no trespassing signs, and filed criminal charges for unlawful entry and animal cruelty. Then I called Channel 7's Sarah Morgan, a pit bull journalist who specialized in exposing suburban corruption. Judge vs. HOA When Watchdogs Attack aired 3 nights later. Sarah's investigation revealed Bryn's systematic targeting of minority and elderly residents, complete with security footage of her criminal trespassing and the landscaping crew's attack on Gavel. The community response was nuclear. Donation offers poured in, not just for vet bills, but for legal fees to destroy that psychotic HOA witch. Justice for Gavel exploded across social media. 3 law firms offered pro bono services. The Colorado Attorney General's office called to discuss civil rights violations. Most beautifully, 5 more families came forward with similar horror stories. Elderly Mrs. Morgan, forced to remove her late husband's memorial garden. The Johnson family, fined into bankruptcy for their disabled son's wheelchair ramp. A pattern of targeting anyone who didn't fit Bryn's vision of suburban perfection. But the real game changer came during my research into Colorado's property protection laws. Buried in the statutes, I'd found a beautiful piece of legal ammunition. Unlawful entry with intent to intimidate carried the same penalties as burglary. Plus, animal cruelty charges could be stacked with conspiracy if multiple people were involved. Bryn's landscaping crew hadn't just committed one crime. They'd created a federal RICO predicate. That evening, gavel finally purred against my chest for the first time since the attack. The sound mixed with the quiet hum of my new security system and the distant click of my keyboard as I drafted criminal complaints that would end Bryn's reign of terror permanently. Harold used to say that judges were just referees with permanent authority and long memories. Time to show this suburban terrorist what happens when you torture a federal judge's family. She'd escalated from civil violations to felony assault. My response would be biblical. Bryn's desperation reached nuclear levels when she realized her criminal trespassing had backfired into federal charges. So naturally, she decided to destroy my career before I could destroy hers. The complaint hit my desk via certified mail on Tuesday morning, official Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission letterhead that made my coffee taste like ash. Bryn's allegations read like fiction. Judge Blackwood abuses judicial authority to intimidate law-abiding homeowners, weaponizing the legal system for personal vendettas that threaten community safety. The supporting evidence was criminal in its creativity. Doctored photographs showing my memorial garden as some kind of neighborhood blight, falsified witness statements from her designer and trainer claiming I'd threatened them, and timestamps that would make a CSI tech weep with laughter. But Bryn's nuclear option? She'd leaked everything to political blogs that opposed my previous environmental rulings. Within hours, I was trending as liberal judge terrorizes patriotic HOA. Comment sections exploded with keyboard warriors demanding my impeachment, disbarment, and creative suggestions about what should happen to activist judges who hate America. For 72 hours, I watched 20 years of judicial service get shredded by people who couldn't spell jurisprudence, but somehow understood constitutional law better than federal judges. Then my salvation arrived in the form of a silver-haired woman carrying homemade cookies. Patricia Pat Donnelly looked like everyone's retired librarian, sensible cardigan, orthopedic shoes, hands that trembled slightly with age. What she didn't look like was a 25-year FBI veteran who'd specialized in financial crimes and had apparently been conducting surveillance on Bryn for weeks. "Judge, I think you should see this," she said, settling into Harold's chair with the calm confidence of someone used to delivering life-changing news. Pat spread photographs across my kitchen table like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Meet Bethany Sterling of Phoenix, Arizona. 3 insurance claims in 2 years, mysterious flood, convenient electrical fire, and miraculous vandalism. $400,000 in payouts. Disappeared right before the grand jury convened. My judicial training kicked in, recognizing patterns like DNA evidence. She's done this before. Textbook operation. Target established neighborhoods, create conflicts to justify claims, vanish before investigations conclude. Pat's FBI instincts were surgical sharp despite retirement. But here's the beautiful part. She filed her current homeowner's application under false identity. That's federal mail fraud. The documents Pat produced made my prosecutor's heart sing. Bryn's current policy valued her $800,000 house at $2.8 million. Her application contained lies about previous claims, identity changes, and financial history that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. "She's not harassing you because of old grudges," Pat continued, organizing evidence with professional precision. "You're the distraction. Keep everyone focused on HOA drama while she embezzles association funds and sets up the next accidental fire." The revelation hit like a judicial gavel to the skull. This wasn't personal revenge. It was criminal misdirection. While I'd been fighting fence violations, Bryn had been draining HOA emergency funds and preparing insurance fraud that would devastate the entire community. Pat handed me a manila folder thick enough to choke a defense attorney. Sterling Premium Builders filed bankruptcy last month. Colorado suspended their license for tax evasion. The HOA presidency was never about neighborhood control. It was about accessing community funds for personal use. My harassment wasn't random targeting. It was professional distraction, keeping a federal judge busy with petty disputes while she systematically robbed our community blind. But Pat's final revelation made my blood freeze. She's already filed preliminary insurance claims for developing structural issues and increasing neighborhood safety concerns. Your house isn't just a target, Judge. It's scheduled to be evidence in her next insurance scam. That evening, I sat surrounded by evidence that transformed my personal nightmare into a federal RICO case. bank records showing $340,000 missing from HOA emergency funds, insurance applications containing enough lies to trigger perjury charges, a pattern of targeting minorities and elderly residents that screamed civil rights violations. Bryn hadn't picked me because I'd ruled against her husband. She'd chosen me because terrorizing a federal judge created perfect cover for systematic theft and fraud preparation. But in her criminal arrogance, she'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. Instead of targeting helpless elderly residents, she'd decided to run federal crimes against someone who understood exactly how to dismantle criminal enterprises using every tool in the federal legal arsenal. The soft glow of my computer screen illuminated Harold's office as I began drafting communications to federal prosecutors who specialized in interstate fraud and civil rights violations. My husband always said that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon when wielded by someone who understood timing. Bryn Ashworth Sterling was about to learn that running insurance scams while terrorizing a federal judge wasn't just stupid, it was life sentence stupid. Time to show this suburban criminal what federal justice looked like when it was personal. The manila envelope Pat slid across my kitchen table felt heavier than a death sentence. Inside were photographs that made my hands tremble and my prosecutor's instincts scream in recognition. "Judge, what I'm about to show you changes everything," Pat said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years hunting federal criminals. "Bryn Ashworth Sterling doesn't exist." The first photo showed a California driver's license from 2018. Rebecca Ashworth, with Bryn's face smiling back at me. The second revealed Beth Sterling from Phoenix, same woman, different identity. The third made my coffee cup slip from numb fingers. Sandra McKenzie from Detroit, dated 2010, with a federal prisoner ID number stamped across the bottom. "She's a professional community destroyer," Pat explained, organizing evidence with surgical precision. 4 states, 6 identities, systematic HOA infiltration followed by embezzlement and insurance fraud. She's stolen over $4 million in the past decade. My judicial training kicked in, but the personal horror made my voice crack. How many families has she destroyed? 15 confirmed. Always the same pattern. Target established neighborhoods, create harassment campaigns against minorities and elderly residents, embezzle emergency funds, then torch high-value properties for insurance payouts. Pat's FBI instincts were razor-sharp despite retirement. In Sacramento, 3 Hispanic families were driven out before the community center mysteriously burned. Phoenix lost 5 elderly residents to stress-related health problems during her reign of terror. The next document made my blood freeze solid. Architectural plans for my house, obtained through Sterling Premium Builders contractor database, marked with detailed notes about electrical vulnerabilities, foundation access points, and optimal fire acceleration patterns. "She's been planning to burn your house down since day one," Pat said quietly. "The harassment was misdirection while she prepared the perfect arson. Your property's worth $180,000, but Harold's life insurance upgrades pushed the rebuild value to $320,000. She's planning to claim fire spread to her property, triggering both policies for maximum payout." My hands shook as I traced Harold's electrical upgrade notes in the margins. Work we'd done together during his final months, trying to create lasting improvements to our sanctuary. Bryn had turned our love into her criminal opportunity. But Pat's final revelation shattered every assumption I'd made about this case. She's not just a criminal, Judge. She's a federal fugitive operating under stolen identities while technically still in witness protection. Bryn McKenzie testified against a Detroit fraud ring in 2012, got 18 months federal time, then disappeared from the program in 2015. The implications hit like a judicial gavel to the skull. This woman was running organized crime operations while protected by federal witness programs, stealing taxpayer-funded identities to commit the exact crimes she'd supposedly reformed from. The witness protection violation alone carries 10 years federal minimum, Pat continued. Add the multi-state fraud conspiracy, identity theft, and now attempted arson against a federal judge. She's looking at life without parole. I stared at photographs of families she'd destroyed, communities she'd devastated, elderly residents who'd died from stress-induced heart attacks during her harassment campaigns. My personal nightmare was just the latest chapter in a decade-long federal crime spree. The musty smell of old case files mixed with the bitter taste of betrayal as I realized the scope of Bryn's criminal enterprise. She hadn't targeted me because of old grudges. She'd researched my husband's death, my financial vulnerability, my judicial schedule, and my emotional attachments to create the perfect victim profile. But in her criminal arrogance, she'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd chosen to run federal crimes against someone who understood exactly how to coordinate multi-jurisdictional prosecutions with every federal agency from FBI to Treasury. Time to show this professional predator what federal justice looked like when it was personal, permanent, and absolutely merciless. My kitchen transformed into a federal war room faster than you could say RICO conspiracy. By Thursday evening, Pat, Walt, and attorney Rebecca Morgan sat around Harold's table like avenging angels planning biblical justice, surrounded by evidence boxes that could bury Bryn's criminal empire 6 feet underground. Rebecca Morgan was a legal predator in designer suits, former federal prosecutor turned white-collar defense attorney who'd never lost a RICO case and had apparently been waiting her entire career for a villain this perfectly prosecutable. She'd driven down from Denver with 3 paralegals and enough legal firepower to flatten a small dictatorship. "Judge, we're not just prosecuting neighborhood harassment," Rebecca announced, spreading color-coded flowcharts across my table like battle plans for World War III. "We're dismantling a decade-long federal crime spree that's destroyed 15 communities and stolen over $4 million. The smell of fresh legal documents mixed with Walt's pipe tobacco as we outlined our 3-pronged assault: federal annihilation, state prosecution, and civil rights demolition. Rebecca's strategy was surgical in its precision and biblical in its scope. Federal charges first. Mail fraud across state lines carries 20-year minimums. Wire fraud for electronic HOA theft adds another 20. Identity theft using witness protection programs, 10 years mandatory. RICO conspiracy for systematic community destruction, life without parole." She smiled like a shark scenting blood. "We're talking about federal sentences that'll keep her locked up until climate change drowns the prison." Pat coordinated federal agency involvement with retired FBI efficiency that made current agents look like mall security. Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Treasury Financial Crimes, FBI Interstate Fraud Task Force, they're all drooling over this case. By tomorrow morning, Bryn will have more federal surveillance than a terrorist cell. My role was evidence preservation and victim coordination, skills I'd perfected during 20 years of complex criminal cases. During law school, I'd memorized every provision of Colorado's Open Records Act after my slumlord tried hiding financial records. HOA finances were completely transparent to community members who knew how to request them properly. We were about to demand 5 years of detailed accounting and watch Bryn's embezzlement empire crumble under public scrutiny. Walt's community intelligence network was our secret weapon. 60 years of neighborhood relationships had created an information web that would make the CIA jealous. "Every family Bryn's terrorized is documenting everything," he reported, organizing victim statements with military precision. "Mrs. Rodriguez is driving back from Phoenix with 17 witnesses. The Johnson family's keeping disability discrimination records that'll make federal prosecutors weep with joy." But our most satisfying preparation was the technical surveillance upgrade. Pat had transformed my modest security system into federal evidence collection machinery capable of recording crimes in courtroom-quality detail. Every camera angle was calibrated for maximum prosecutorial impact. "Here's the beautiful part," Pat explained while testing audio equipment that could capture conversations 3 houses away. "Bryn's actively committing fresh crimes while we're building the case. Every fraudulent fine, every harassment letter, every HOA fund transfer creates real-time evidence for federal prosecutors." Rebecca handled immediate legal protection with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd specialized in destroying white-collar criminals. Emergency injunctions freeze HOA accounts tomorrow morning. Criminal complaints hit 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. Civil rights violations filed with Colorado Attorney General for systematic targeting based on ethnicity and age. The financial implications were equally devastating for Bryn's operation. I'd learned during my judicial career that the Homeowners Protection Act required insurance companies to notify mortgage holders about fraud investigations. Bryn's insurance scams would trigger audits of every Pinewood policy, potentially saving neighbors hundreds of thousands in premium increases while destroying her credibility with every insurance company in America. Our emergency protocols acknowledged that cornered criminals became desperately dangerous. Rebecca had arranged protective surveillance for vulnerable residents, including elderly neighbors and families with small children. We'd learned from federal cases that systematic fraudsters often escalated to violence when facing life sentences. By midnight, we'd constructed a legal machine designed for complete annihilation of Bryn's criminal enterprise, with maximum protection for every victim she'd terrorized. The precision was beautiful, the scope was overwhelming, and the outcome was inevitable. "When we're finished," Rebecca summarized with prosecutorial satisfaction, "Bryn Mackenzie will spend her remaining years in federal maximum security. Sterling Premium Builders gets liquidated for victim restitution. Every harassed resident receives compensation plus punitive damages. And we establish legal precedents protecting communities nationwide from similar predators." The quiet hum of my upgraded security system mixed with the soft click of my keyboard as I drafted victim impact statements designed to make federal judges demand maximum sentences. Harold always said that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon when combined with overwhelming legal force applied at exactly the right psychological moment. Tomorrow morning, professional criminal Bryn Ashworth Sterling would discover that terrorizing a federal judge's community wasn't just catastrophically stupid. It was life sentence guaranteeing, legacy destroying, federal prison ensuring stupid. Time to execute justice with extreme legal prejudice. Bryn's response to our legal offensive proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-blown domestic terrorism. Her desperation was about to turn my neighborhood into a crime scene that would make federal prosecutors salivate. The attack came Tuesday afternoon while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater, perfect alibi timing that Bryn had clearly researched through my public court schedule. My military-grade security system captured every felonious second in evidence quality, high definition. At 2:47 p.m., unmarked trucks disgorged a crew that moved with professional efficiency. These weren't landscapers, they were arson specialists wearing coveralls and carrying equipment designed for one purpose, turning my house into an insurance fire that would spread to Bryn's property for maximum payout. The cameras recorded them creating accelerant highways around my foundation, installing unmarked propane connections near electrical panels, and positioning dead vegetation in patterns that would guarantee fire spread toward Bryn's million-dollar target. The precision was chilling, the criminal intent obvious, and the federal evidence quality absolutely devastating. But Bryn's nuclear-level stupidity peaked when she arrived with Channel 7's news crew, claiming she'd received anonymous tips about dangerous fire hazards at the judge's residence. "Community safety is my only concern," she told Sarah Morgan while standing directly over planted evidence of her own arson conspiracy. "When public officials ignore fire prevention, innocent neighbors could die." The brass balls were impressive. The federal charges would be biblical. My phone erupted with calls from Pat's surveillance network. Walt had photographed the entire crew from multiple angles. Mrs. Rodriguez had recorded license plates that would make police lineups unnecessary. Even our postal worker had documented suspicious activity while delivering what would become the last mail my house might ever receive. Then Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived for Bryn's requested safety inspection. Morrison was a 30-year arson investigation veteran whose trained eye spotted planted evidence faster than a federal prosecutor spots plea bargains. "Judge," he said quietly, kneeling beside obviously artificial accelerant patterns, "someone's setting up your house to burn. This isn't code violation. This is premeditated murder." The soil analysis would later reveal professionally applied fire accelerants. Gas connections violated 16 safety codes and bore fingerprints that matched Sterling Premium's contractor database. The placement patterns indicated expert knowledge of fire behavior, insurance investigation procedures, and exactly how to create accidental blazes that would trigger maximum payouts. "Whoever planned this knows how to kill people and make it look like electrical malfunction," Morrison continued, his professional disgust palpable. "These aren't random safety issues. This is systematic preparation for insurance fraud through homicide." But Bryn's desperation reached criminal crescendo when Morrison refused to condemn my property based on planted evidence. Her response was captured on his department-issued body camera, a cash bribery attempt that transformed misdemeanor harassment into federal corruption charges carrying decade-long prison sentences. "Inspector, surely we can handle this situation efficiently," Bryn said, sliding a thick envelope across his clipboard with practiced corruption. "Community safety requires proper documentation, and I'm sure you understand the importance of cooperation." Morrison's body camera recorded every incriminating word, every illegal gesture, and Bryn's shocked expression when he informed her that bribing public officials was federal felony, punishable by 10 years minimum security. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Pat's intelligence network revealed similar arson preparation at 3 other targeted properties, all owned by elderly residents or minority families. Federal agents swarmed Pinewood like antibodies attacking infection, documenting systematic terrorism that made Bryn's operation look like organized crime. Rebecca Morgan's legal response was swift and merciless. Federal warrants issued within hours for Bryn, her husband, and their entire criminal crew. Bank accounts frozen pending RICO investigation. Sterling premium placed under federal asset forfeiture that would liquidate everything they'd stolen. But the most beautiful irony? Bryn's planted evidence became forensic proof of premeditated arson conspiracy. Her bribery attempt created federal corruption charges that would stack with existing crimes like legal dominoes falling toward life sentences. That evening, I sat surrounded by evidence that would guarantee federal prison for everyone involved in Bryn's criminal enterprise. The acrid smell of planted accelerant still hung in the air, but it no longer smelled like destruction. It smelled like justice being prepared with federal precision. My hands shook as I realized how close I'd come to dying in Harold's house, surrounded by memories of our life together, while Bryn collected insurance money on my corpse. The woman hadn't just planned theft. She'd planned murder disguised as accident. But her criminal overconfidence had destroyed her own operation. Every planted accelerant became federal evidence. Every bribery attempt created additional felony charges. Every witness she'd tried to silence was now cooperating with federal prosecutors who specialized in maximum sentences. The soft hum of federal surveillance equipment mixed with distant sounds of law enforcement agencies coordinating dawn raids that would end Bryn's reign of terror permanently. Harold always said that justice delayed wasn't justice denied. Sometimes it was justice being sharpened to lethal precision. Tomorrow morning, domestic terrorist Bryn Ashworth Sterling would discover that attempting to murder a federal judge carried consequences she'd never imagined. The explosion at 3:17 a.m. ripped me from dreams of Harold into a nightmare that would haunt Bryn Ashworth Sterling for the rest of her federal prison sentence. I was sleeping in Walt's guest room, my own house no longer safe after yesterday's arson preparation, when the blast shook windows 3 blocks away. Through Walt's bedroom window, I watched 28 years of memories erupt into flames that turned night into hellish orange daylight. Harold's house, our sanctuary, the kitchen where we'd planned our retirement, the bedroom where I'd held him during his final nights, the memorial garden where his ashes were scattered among roses he'd tended for 15 years, all of it disappearing into smoke and federal evidence. The fire was so intense that Denver Fire had to establish a 3-block perimeter. Professional arsonists had turned my home into a controlled demolition disguised as electrical malfunction, using techniques that guaranteed maximum destruction and optimal insurance timing. But Bryn's criminal overconfidence had just created the most beautiful trap in federal prosecution history. I stood on Walt's porch in Harold's old bathrobe, watching our life burn while federal arson investigator Marcus Webb coordinated a crime scene that looked like domestic terrorism. "Judge, this wasn't random," he said grimly, thermal imaging revealing accelerant patterns that formed perfect fire highways. "Someone wanted you dead and wanted it to look accidental." The evidence was overwhelming and perfectly preserved. My security system had survived in fireproof housing, capturing every criminal second. Sterling Premium's crew entering at 2:45 a.m., followed by Bryn's husband carrying professional fire acceleration equipment at 3:10 a.m. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Insurance investigator Jennifer Park discovered that Bryn had filed preliminary damage claims for fire spreading from neighboring property at 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes before my house was actually ignited. She submitted paperwork claiming her house would suffer fire damage before your house was even burning. Park explained with prosecutorial satisfaction. "That's not prediction. That's documentary evidence of premeditated murder." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors appeared with coffee, blankets, and righteous fury that made federal agents take notes. Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed my hands with tears streaming. "Mija, she tried to kill you. We all saw her planning this murder." Then came the moment that would live forever in federal prosecution legend. Bryn actually showed up at the fire scene. The woman appeared in designer athleisure and full makeup at 4:30 a.m., expressing deep community concern to news cameras while standing 50 feet from the house she'd just had torched. Her performance was Academy Award caliber in its complete sociopathic detachment from reality. This tragic accident reinforces why our HOA must maintain strict safety standards, she told Channel 7 with theatrical grief. Judge Blackwood's resistance to proper inspections may have contributed to this devastating loss of life. What she didn't realize was that FBI agents were recording every word for her eventual murder trial, while federal marshals were already preparing dawn arrest warrants based on evidence so overwhelming that plea bargains were mathematically impossible. The financial investigation revealed criminal genius wrapped in homicidal stupidity. Bryn had embezzled $340,000 from HOA funds to finance professional arson. Her insurance policy valued her house at $2.8 million, despite purchasing it for $800,000. The spreading fire damage she'd pre-filed would have triggered payouts exceeding some countries' annual budgets. But federal prosecutors had been monitoring every transaction since Pat's investigation began. Bank records showed payments to known arsonists. Cell phone data placed both criminals at the scene during ignition. Insurance applications contained enough lies to guarantee perjury convictions in all 50 states. Rebecca Morgan's response was swift and biblical. Federal marshals arrested both Ashworth Sterlings during dawn raids broadcast live on national television. Assets seized under RICO forfeiture would compensate victims from 4 states. Sterling premium was liquidated faster than evidence in a shredder. The charges were life sentence beautiful. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, insurance fraud across multiple jurisdictions, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and RICO violations that would keep them locked up until archaeologists discovered their skeletons. That evening, I sat in Walt's kitchen, surrounded by federal agents who'd traveled from multiple states to coordinate the largest HOA fraud prosecution in American history. The smoke smell still clung to my clothes, but it no longer smelled like destruction. It smelled like justice being prepared at maximum temperature. My house was gone, but Harold's memory lived in the community that had protected me when his sanctuary couldn't. Bryn had tried to murder me in my sleep and ended up creating federal evidence that would keep her locked away until the sun burned out. The soft sound of handcuffs clicking on news footage felt like Harold whispering approval from whatever legal afterlife judges inhabit. Some battles were worth losing everything to win permanently. Tomorrow, domestic terrorist Bryn Ashworth Sterling would discover that attempting to murder a federal judge carried consequences that lasted longer than life sentences. 7 days after my house became a crime scene, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom in federal custody, orange jumpsuit replacing designer athleisure, facing charges that would keep her locked up until archaeologists discovered her remains. The irony was so perfect it felt like Harold had orchestrated it from the afterlife. My courtroom was packed beyond capacity, standing room only with overflow crowds watching live streams outside. Federal marshals, FBI agents, insurance investigators, and prosecutors from 4 states filled the gallery like an army of justice preparing for biblical warfare. Channel 7 had cameras positioned for maximum dramatic impact. The Colorado Attorney General sat in the front row taking notes for civil rights legislation. Most beautifully, 17 families Bryn had terrorized were present as witnesses, including Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnson family with their disabled son, and elderly residents who'd been driven from their homes by her systematic harassment campaigns. Judge Patricia Morrison, my colleague who'd agreed to handle the arraignment after my recusal, called the court to order with the gravity befitting a domestic terrorism case. The people of Colorado versus Bryn McKenzie, also known as Bethany Sterling, also known as Rebecca Ashworth, also known as Sandra Mitchell. The list of false identities took 30 seconds to read. The criminal charges took 4 minutes. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, insurance fraud across multiple states, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, RICO violations, identity theft, witness protection fraud, and systematic civil rights violations. Bryn's attorney, a public defender who'd clearly drawn the shortest straw in legal history, requested reasonable bond based on her community ties and lack of flight risk. Federal prosecutor Amanda Stevens stood with the satisfaction of someone holding royal flushes in a poker game. Your Honor, the defendant has operated under 6 false identities across 4 states while stealing over $4 million and destroying 15 communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her house, then appeared on television claiming the victim had caused her own near-death experience. The gallery murmured with righteous anger that made federal marshals shift nervously. But the moment that would be replayed on legal documentaries for decades came when Bryn made the catastrophic decision to address the court directly. "Your Honor," she said, turning toward me with the unbroken arrogance of a sociopath who still didn't understand the scope of her destruction, "Judge Blackwood has used her position to orchestrate a vendetta against law-abiding homeowners. She's weaponized the federal government against citizens exercising legitimate HOA authority. This entire prosecution is judicial abuse masquerading as justice." The silence in my courtroom was deafening. Federal agents exchanged glances that promised additional charges. Prosecutors scribbled notes frantically. The gallery held its collective breath, waiting for judicial response. Judge Morrison's voice carried 20 years of federal bench authority when she replied, "Ms. Mackenzie, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge by burning down her house while she slept. You embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from community emergency funds. You operated under false identities while terrorizing elderly and minority residents. You filed fraudulent insurance claims totaling millions of dollars across multiple states." She paused, letting the weight of federal justice settle over the courtroom like a burial shroud. "The evidence against you includes security footage of the arson, recorded bribery attempts, documented harassment campaigns, financial records of systematic theft, and insurance applications containing lies that constitute federal perjury. You are not a victim of judicial vendetta. You are a domestic terrorist who targeted a federal judge's community for systematic destruction." The mic drop moment came when Morrison continued. "Furthermore, this court has reviewed evidence that you've destroyed 15 communities and displaced over 200 families through identical fraud schemes. Your pattern of targeting elderly and minority residents constitutes systematic civil rights violations that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." Bryn's face crumpled as the reality of life sentences crashed through her sociopathic delusions. Her attorney whispered frantically about plea bargains that everyone knew were mathematically impossible given the overwhelming evidence. "Bond is denied," Judge Morrison declared with finality that echoed through packed galleries. "The defendant poses an extreme flight risk and danger to community safety. Remand to federal custody pending trial." The gallery erupted in applause that federal marshals didn't even attempt to suppress. Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed with relief. Walt pumped his fist like his team had won the World Series. 17 families who'd been terrorized by Bryn's criminal enterprise finally witnessed justice being served at maximum temperature. As federal marshals led Bryn away in chains, she turned toward me one final time with hatred that could have powered small cities. "This isn't over, Judge. You'll never prove I specifically targeted you for murder." The courtroom fell silent as I stood, black robes carrying 20 years of federal authority, and delivered the words that would close this chapter of domestic terrorism forever. "Mrs. Mackenzie, the court finds your confession that this was indeed targeted harassment to be duly noted for sentencing purposes. Federal prosecutors now have documented admission of premeditated intent. Thank you for eliminating any remaining reasonable doubt." The sound of justice being served echoed through my courtroom like Harold's final approval. 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen watching cardinals feast at Harold's memorial feeder, while federal maximum security served Bryn Mackenzie her daily helping of justice. Life without parole in a concrete box, where domestic terrorists contemplate their life choices for eternity. The taste of morning coffee mixed with the sweet satisfaction of watching evil get exactly what it deserved. The criminal trials had been prosecutors' dreams and defense attorneys' nightmares. Federal juries took 3 hours and 47 minutes to convict both Ashworth Sterlings on all counts. Apparently, they'd needed time for lunch. Bryn received life without parole for attempted murder of a federal judge, plus consecutive sentences for arson, fraud, and civil rights violations that would keep her locked up until climate change turned Colorado into beachfront property. Her husband earned 25 years for conspiracy, ensuring Sterling Premium's criminal enterprise was permanently extinct. The $3.2 million in seized assets had been distributed to victims across 4 states, creating the largest HOA fraud restitution in American legal history. Every targeted family received compensation plus punitive damages that established legal precedents protecting communities nationwide from future predators. But the real victory lived in Pinewood's transformation from terrorized kingdom to model community that law schools now studied. Walt Henderson reigned as unanimously elected HOA president, implementing transparency measures that made embezzlement impossible and resident protections guaranteeing due process for future disputes. Our reformed bylaws required community approval for fines over $50, monthly financial reports published online, and mandatory mediation before legal action. Most beautifully, systematic targeting based on ethnicity, age, or economic status was explicitly prohibited with automatic removal for violating board members. The ripple effects had spread like wildfire through American suburbs. Colorado's Pinewood Protection Act required HOA financial transparency, limited fine authority, and established state oversight for communities with systematic complaint patterns. 15 other states adopted similar legislation, protecting millions from future Bryn Mackenzies, while their inspiration rotted in federal prison. The Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship had grown beyond our wildest dreams. Documentary rights, book sales, and donations from grateful communities had raised $750,000, supporting first-generation college students studying community law and civil rights. This year's star recipient was Maria Rodriguez, daughter of the family Bryn had terrorized, now heading to Harvard Law with dreams of protecting vulnerable communities nationwide. Our annual Pinewood Justice Festival drew thousands celebrating community triumph over individual evil. Local vendors donated proceeds to legal defense funds helping other neighborhoods fight corruption. Walt's Bluegrass Band headlined, while Pat Donnelly ran packed workshops on financial crime investigation that had helped residents in 47 states identify and prosecute HOA fraud. The festival combined celebration with education through our Community Resource Center, helping neighborhoods recognize harassment patterns, document financial crimes, and coordinate federal investigations. 41 copycat criminals had been arrested using our model, saving thousands of families from Bryn's fate. My judicial career had earned national recognition for maintaining ethics under extreme pressure, leading to speaking engagements at law schools about protecting community rights while preserving judicial integrity. The American Bar Association created the Blackwood Award, recognizing judges who demonstrated courage defending civil rights against systematic oppression. But personal victory meant more than professional recognition. Gavel had recovered completely, now ruling our rebuilt sanctuary with feline authority that would intimidate federal marshals. The memorial garden bloomed more magnificently than ever, Harold's roses thriving in soil enriched by community love and protected by security, ensuring no future terrorism. This evening, golden sunset streamed through new windows as I reviewed scholarship applications while Gavel supervised from his throne. Outside, Pat tended her victory garden, Walt taught neighborhood children harmonica, and families gathered for conversations that Bryn's reign of terror had once made impossible. The gentle sound of children's laughter had replaced sirens and confrontation, proving justice wasn't just punishment, it was protection, healing, and hope for futures free from suburban predators. Here's my message for anyone battling HOA nightmares or petty tyrants with measuring tapes. Document everything, organize your neighbors, and remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent. Your horror story could become someone else's salvation. Drop a comment sharing your own HOA nightmare. You're definitely not alone in fighting these suburban dictators, and smash that subscribe button for HOA stories because next week we're destroying the tax assessor who tried stealing an entire neighborhood for personal profit. That revenge was equally biblical, and the federal charges were absolutely beautiful. Together, we're building communities where justice wins and criminals lose permanently.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.